In this video, I'm going to walk you through all of the privacy settings you need to be aware of when you want to expose your application's API endpoints. Every API is going to come with two public endpoints. The first is to the workflow API. So this gives you access to your backend workflows and also gives external services access to those backend workflows, of course, provided you have all of the right security settings enabled. Then the other endpoint is your data API, which exposes your database. So this means external services can access your data, all of the records and the values in your database via API. Again, there's many levels of security that you can add here so that only the right people or the right services get access to specific tables, specific fields, okay, and even specific types of access. Maybe they can only read things versus edit things, create, delete. All right, so this is the gateway. Let's start with the data API. When I check this box, I've now exposed the database to the API. When it's unchecked, nobody can get access to it via API, okay? Turning it on, Bubble is going to show this pop-up to remind me, hey, you need to implement privacy rules to have more granular control over the security around the data types. This is very important. Privacy rules have a big impact on whether things are accessible or not via API. Just turning on that checkbox should not be enough. You need to think about your privacy rules as well. We are going to look at some examples here. So I'm going to close this for now. Now, once you've enabled your data API, you also need to specify which data types you want to expose. It's not an all or nothing thing. This is a very good thing. You can pick and choose which data types you want exposed. Now, I'm actually going to jump into a separate application here where we've actually got more data. And I have exposed the data API for a data type called school. Okay, if we look at my database, I have 3 entries here in this school table. Okay, but you can see that I have no privacy rules set up. So the only thing that's been enabled is the data API for this app. I've turned it on for the school data type. I do have records here, but I do not have any privacy rules created. So it's still pretty public. Okay, it's publicly accessible. If I go to a browser window and simply put in the address to this data type, okay, so we have the root domain, and you have API 1.1, that's the version we're on, OBJ stands for object, and then the name of the data type, school, I will have access to that data. Anybody can load this page and freely see this. Now, this root domain you can find when you open up the access to your data API. It's listed there for you. So all you need to do to get to the actual resource is / and then the name of your data type. So with my school data type, it's open. And so I'm able to access this here. Just to show you again, I'm going to refresh so we can see we have access. Okay. Now, if I wanted to create a first level of security, I would add a privacy rule. So I'm going to go back into my editor, create a new rule. Let's create this rule admin. Okay. And the privacy rule is going to be when the current user's admin is yes. So now there's a rule on the school data type. The default permission prevents access to anybody who is not an admin. Now, as an external source, there is no way for the application to know whether I'm an admin or not. So now when I refresh the page, look at that. No results come back because I have not met the privacy rule. So I've now protected it in a certain way, right? So only users who are admin, in other words, really only users who are logged in and this admin field is set to yes, will be able to find those school records in searches and view all of the fields. Okay. Now, Bubble does have a way for external services to bypass these privacy rules. And you may run into that, right? You might have privacy rules for your users when they're logged into the app, but you may also have external services that need to access your data. You don't want to leave it completely vulnerable without any privacy rules, but those services need to bypass those rules. Well, that's where you can create an API token. So if you go back to your settings and under the endpoint exposures here, you can click on this button to generate a new API token. This is another way to basically grant access to anybody who's making a request to these endpoints, is to provide basically a password. You can see the token as a password, all right? So when you create a token, and you can create as many as you'd like here, you want to give it an internal name. So let's say, for example, the name of your external service, whatever it might be. This also is helpful because if you feel like the key is compromised, you can recreate it, you can regenerate it. That makes the old key revoked, right? It's not going to work anymore. Or you can simply delete it, and that previous key will not work anymore as well. Being able to create multiple tokens will also make it so that every individual service you give access to has their own key. So it's a little bit more separated that way. Okay, so if we go back to the browser here, remember when I load this page, I cannot see any details because there is a privacy rule. But if I want to override those because I'm an external service with a special token that I've been granted, then what they would need to provide is the token either in the header as a bearer token, and we'll see an example of that in a moment, or as a part of the query string in the endpoint. So I've actually got it right here. Okay, the key is API underscore token, and then you would have the value of the token generated that you created in the settings there in that parameter. And so now we have access to that school data. We have all of the fields that we can see there, right? Even though there is a privacy rule here. Okay, so that is what the API token can do, is bypass those. Now, I want to switch over to an external API testing tool. We went over this in our video about tools and settings. This is a standalone API tool where you can make requests to see what the responses are going to be. It's very helpful for troubleshooting, so you can act as an external party. So what I've done is I've created a call to basically go to that same endpoint, right? This is the same thing that I had in the browser, okay? And you'll notice here that I am going to the school object and I do not have an API key. So if I make this request, just like an external service would, they'll technically get a successful response, but all of the data is going to come back empty. In other words, we're not going to have any data. It's a successful response because we've, made a call to a correct address, but we do not have access to that information. Now, the second way to provide that key, as I described earlier, is in the header. So at the browser level, we provided it as a part of the endpoint. And you can technically do that here as well. I could put that query parameter in there. But a safer way is actually to provide the key in the header. And for this, we would say authorization is the key name. Authorization, let me fill this in here. And then the value is going to be the word bearer, because technically this is a bearer token. And we're going to have our key, which I'm going to grab from here, like this. Now when I make this request, I have access to all of the data. There's the school name, second school, third school here. We can see the result there. Okay, I brought this open here because I want to show you a few different examples of running calls as if you were an external service so that you can test them. This Talend API Tester is a Chrome extension. It's super, super helpful for validating that you have all of your privacy rules set up properly. Okay, so that is the data API. Now, let's look at the next API endpoint that you have, which is your workflow API. So when you check this box, you will expose the backend workflow section of your editor, which is this section here. If I turn this off, then that section is going to go away. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back on and head over to the backend workflows. This is where you can create server-side workflows. Now you can trigger these workflows internally. Pages in your application can trigger the schedule API workflow action, or external services can also trigger these. And typically when an external service is triggering one of your backend workflows, that's typically going to be for a webhook. So if you want to receive a real-time notification from an outside service, that's normally what those are for. But you might have other cases where maybe other applications need to retrieve information for other reasons. Now I'm going to jump back into my other application where I have a few more things set up here. Now in this purple workflow here, I've created an endpoint called Get Schools. So we're actually going to retrieve schools a different way. Instead of retrieving them via the data API, I can also get them via the workflow API, because my actions can return a response in a more customized format, actually. And I'm going to build this from scratch here so you can see what I mean. So this endpoint, first, I do need to expose as a public API workflow. Okay, so that an external service can call it. And for now, before we do any privacy layers, I'm going to allow this to run without authentication and ignore all of the privacy rules. So it's pretty open from this point. when this endpoint is called, I want to return data from API. This is a handy little call here if you need to send back a response, with any information from your database structured in a certain way. You can return plain text. Actually, let's do this first here. I'm just going to say, hello world. Let's do a search for schools, and I'm going to count the number of schools, and I'll say X number of schools in the system. Okay, just a plain text response when this API workflow is called. So I'm going to go back to my Talend tester here and go to this other call. We'll say save on that one. So this is now a post call to my backend workflow. Okay, you can see here, this is the root domain, and the endpoint is called get schools. That's exactly what I have created here. I have it fully open. Okay, post call, and let me remove the authentication here for now. And I'll hit send to make the call. And here you go, there is the response. Hello world, we have 3 schools in the system because the action here did a quick calculation to count up the number of items in the system. This API workflow also has the ability to accept GET requests. So depending on the external service, they may or may not have the ability to do post calls. Post calls are typical. Those are going to be more common. But in the event that you have a service that you're working with that only does GET calls, then you have that ability there. So I can change this to say, okay, actually make a GET call to that endpoint, and we should just receive the exact same response here. Yes, all successful. Okay, I'm going to return it back to post and bring this back to post as well. And here I'm going to actually send back data in a more structured format. So instead of plain text, I'm going to add a parameter called schools, like this. And this is going to be a list of school records from my database. And here I have to define which schools I want to send back as a response. So I'm just going to do every school in the system. I will search for schools, and that is it. I can, of course, add constraints to say, only return schools that were created within the last week, or that, belong to a certain administrator, or belong to a student, whatever it might be. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Talend tester here and hit send. And what we should see is a structured response for our schools. There we go. Now we have the 3 schools there. So that was 2 different ways of getting to this information. A GET call to the data API and also a post call to the workflow API, where I actually have more control here. You'll notice that I can send back more information actually. So I'm just going to say some text here like this, and this is some note. All right, so I'm passing 2 parameters. I've just passed in some static values, but of course we can pull other details from the database, from other data types or option sets, whatever it might be. Let's just run this real quick. And we'll see there are my 2 parameters, the school formatted data there, and then also my plain text. Really powerful function if you're communicating with an external source. Now let's look at adding security layers to this workflow. We have 2 levels that we can work with. We have the API key layer, and we also have the privacy rules. Okay, so let's start by enabling privacy rules, or in other words, having this workflow honor the privacy rules. I'm going to turn this off here. Okay, so now it's going to pay attention to the privacy rules, which, remember, we have one where the user has to be an admin in order to find them in searches and be able to see all of the fields. All right, so I'm going to run this, and what we should not see is the school data. All right, so there we go, empty school information. We still have the some text because it is technically a successful response to the endpoint. This is not wrong, but I've created a protection on the data. This was just a static value that came back. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the API endpoint settings and require authentication. So here, if I provide that API key, I can bypass the privacy rules, just like I did in the browser. So I'm going to add here authorization, then bearer, and I'm going to take my key again from here, like this. And when I run that, I should now be able to bypass the privacy rules. You see now the school data comes back. Okay, now with authentication to this endpoint, the privacy rules also give me more granular control over what aspects of the data API I can access. So far, I only have read-only access. but I can also enable the ability to create new school records, modify existing records, or delete them. So what I'm going to do now is try to create a school without the create checkbox. And we're actually going to look at the everybody else permission first, because this is going to be the best way to demonstrate this. I would not be able to create without bypassing the privacy rules as an external service. So everyone else is going to apply to an external service if they don't follow if they don't meet any privacy rules here. So first, let's leave this unchecked. And I'm going to show you here in my next endpoint. I'm making a post call to the data API for the school data type, right? So this is the obj endpoint / school. That's the name of my data type. And I'm going to pass a name for a new school because my data type for school has a single text field here called name. So I'm going to provide that information. And I'm just going to say sample school like this. So without that checkbox, if I click on send here, I'm going to get an unauthorized result, right? Cannot create this object. Now, if I go back to the privacy rules and click on create, okay, so I enable that. Again, I'm not bypassing privacy rules because I don't have an API key sent in here. I am falling under the everyone else, but I'm allowing the create access. And now if I send this here, we get a successful response. Bubble's going to give me the unique ID of the new record. So I'm going to go back to app data, and you can see there is my sample school. Okay. And so that's exactly what that checkbox is for, is to now give specific access to creating or modifying or deleting your records. If you just do a get call, that is simply to read the data, and you can control if they should be found in searches, if which specific fields you can access, all depending on, you know, what you have turned on or off here in your privacy rules. Now, again, of course, if I bypass the rule with my API key, so I'm going to grab this again, then I should still be able to create, modify, I can do everything because I'm kind of running as a system admin in that case. So authorization, bearer, token here. So even if I turn this off, just to show you here, off in both places, the key always overrules the privacy rules. So let's do sample school 2, send, and we got a successful response, okay? And go back to my data, and we have that record there. All right. Now let's look at the next area where you may run into privacy settings that you need to work with involving your API, which is the Bubble App Connector. Okay, so let's go back into this application. We have the Bubble App Connector installed here. Now this app is actually communicating with the other app that we were just looking at. And what we've done is pulled in the school object as a data source, right? Because we did enable that school data type in the other app's settings, so it's exposed. And from here, we can identify what kind of authentication we need to get to that data, okay? So if I have, let's actually go to a quick page here in this application. I have a repeating group that is going to pull in that data source. But of course, I need to be authorized properly in order to see this information. So let's turn everything off where it's publicly exposed. I don't have to have any layers of security in there. Let's start there. So I'm going to set the authentication to none. I'm going to remove the privacy key. In the other application, I'm going to remove any privacy settings from the school data type. Okay, so from this application here, I'm going to preview this page, which is using the school resource as a data source. So again, I'm on a different app, right? I'm pulling data from the other app through the Bubble App Connector. And here I can see all of those schools that I created. Let's see, I think the repeating group might be limited to 4 rows. Let's change it to 5 so that I can see that second sample school just to prove that we are getting everything from the other application. There we go, okay? So now if I go back into the settings and set the authentication to API key, I need to provide the key in order to access it. Now, of course, this would be necessary if we know that there's a privacy rule set up. So I'm going to add the rule again. Okay, we'll say admin here when the current user's admin is yes, like this. Okay, so if the if the Bubble App connection has no authentication set, but I do have a privacy rule, let's refresh the page and see if we get the data here. All right, no data because I'm not meeting that privacy rule. So if I go back into the setting, say API key, and paste in the key that I've generated into the setting. Again, just as a reminder, this key was generated in the original application that owns this data type from the settings tab. So now I've added that key. I'm telling this application, hey, we are going to authorize ourselves via a key. And if I refresh the page, and I should see the data again because I override those privacy rules with the key. So you want to see the Bubble App connector as another external source. Yes, it's one Bubble App connecting with another Bubble App. They're both in the Bubble world, but this application is seen as an external source, just like this standalone API testing tool. Okay. Now, if you're going to be working with login credentials, signing users in from one application to another, then you would need to work with client IDs in secret, which takes me to my next setting here that you'll find in your API subtab, the third-party OAuth single sign-on feature. So this is not something that's used very commonly, but if you want your Bubble application to act as a login provider to other apps, whether it's a Bubble app or an external website, then you can set up the third-party application here. If you're familiar with OAuth flows, then you are acting as the login provider, right? You are the Google in this case. You are the Facebook in this case. And that other service would need to have ID and secret generated for them. And you would need to define whatever redirect URL that the Bubble application is going to send the user back to when that other service wants to try to log in their users with credentials created in the Bubble app. So if you've watched some of the previous videos going over OAuth 2 systems, this is setting things up in the reverse. Bubble, this app, is the authentication provider. And so you can generate IDs and secrets for the other application trying to use your app as a login provider. And so with the Bubble app connector, Bubble's made it easy here to use one Bubble app to log into another Bubble app. And so you can just provide your client ID and secret there if that's what you're using this for. In that case, if you're going to be accessing certain data that needs to have user permission, then you want to set those calls as an OAuth authentication. You can mix and match your calls when you're communicating with other applications. Some are used as data, some as actions, some don't need authorization, some do if they have privacy rules, some might be user specific. And so you would want to do OAuth authentication there so that the person has to be logged in order to access that information. All right, so those are all of the privacy settings that you need to be aware of when it comes to working with and exposing your own application's API. I highly recommend you work with a tool like the Talend API Tester. Again, this is a Chrome extension, or Postman is another popular one. That's an application you can download to your computer. It's got many more features. If you're going to be a heavy API user, it's very, very helpful for that. And ensure that you are setting up all of the layers of security properly. Test as somebody who should have access, test as somebody who should not have access, and make sure you're getting the right results. All right, everyone, happy building.